which seems in some way kind of the perfect way to culminate this taking part in the gathering. We have at least 8 refugees in our midst, but in a way, we're all taking refuge. This is one of the things, this is like the only thing that we didn't attempt to do on Zoom. Because it just sort of felt like, you gotta be there. There's that ritual element of feeling the blessings and the vows washing over us, and the kind of visceral experience of being witnessed in this journey that these 8 people have undertaken the last long while to take on the vows as co-ops. And I was talking to someone yesterday, one of our refugees, and he said, it's getting serious now. And I said, yeah, it does that. Like, you think I'm going along and this will be this, it's kind of like it's a nice thing to do and it's coming out of me, and it's been quite a journey to contend with these 16 vows. And then it's almost like, I don't know, getting married or having a kid, or like these big events, that these ritual events, somehow you get this feeling of like, oh, I'm contending with the great initiatory forces somehow. And it's getting serious. And refuge itself comes from the 3 jewels, which is taking refuge in awakening, taking refuge in the way or the teachings, and taking refuge in the community. That would be us. And it's interesting because I was looking at the word refuge in our own language, and the part, the return to the original. I thought, yes, that's what we're up to. We're doing this, we're coming to that moment before the original silence, the place before right and wrong, the place before we know what anything is. But the fuge part comes from fugitive and fleeing. And in one way, refuge is taken in our language and culture as this taking shelter, finding safety, and it's sort of implied away from things. And I thought, what we're doing really is we're stopping the fleeing in the way we're doing it. We're looking at the vows as ways that, or the precepts as ways that we tend to flee reality. And we're returning to it. I think we find out pretty quickly that you can't take refuge in your ideas about anything. Very quickly, that one goes away. And mostly because life is so much deeper and stranger and inconceivable than our ideas can ever kind of get hold of. And somehow the precepts become ways of noticing that, how our ideas get in the way of being here, and the kind of resourcefulness that comes from being here. And I was thinking about the first time I encountered any notion of vows was in my early 20s, and my first kind of exposure to Zen through this woman named Pam Weiss. And she did a retreat on the 4 boundless vows, like what we sing at night. And in a similar fashion, you had to write your own vows, and there was something that touched me very deeply about this. I could tell I was just drawn to it. But had this incredibly earnest, naive way of thinking that if I could just get these vows right, I would somehow figure out how to save myself and everyone else from suffering. And I worked really hard on it, and it was almost like, I think the idea in my mind was if I could be kind enough and present enough and generous enough all the time, that I could get a handle on this suffering thing. Of course it didn't go that way. And I think there was also this idea that somehow if I could do that, I would always know what to do. And I could always help. And that was incredibly appealing. Didn't last very long, but was incredibly appealing. And one of the issues with that, and I think one of the things I love so much about the vows as koans, is that way I was holding it is so full of knowing, that I actually will know what's kind and what's generous and for whom and when and in what way, and that I'll actually make myself a little crazy trying to keep up with that. And it was a very interesting distinction she has used, which I'm sure you may have come across, but it came back to me, which is the difference between pain and suffering. And she used to always say, pain comes as part of the deal, but suffering is what we layer on extra. And I was talking to someone who's undertaking the vows at the moment, and she's on the pure vows, which are, I vow to do no harm, I vow to do good, I vow to do good for others. And she was saying to me that like 30-something years ago, she really hates her sister-in-law, her brother's wife. And when they got married, she vowed, and she said, and I vowed, I will accept this woman. And so for 30-something years, she's been trying really hard. And the cycle goes something like this. She tries, she'll do something outlandishly, helpful or good for her sister-in-law. And it goes poorly, and then she thinks, that bitch. Doesn't she see that I'm doing good, I'm trying? And this happened again recently, where the sister-in-law texted her for something, and she went way out of her way to get the information. And then she asked for something in return, and the sister-in-law said, well, why don't you just go look it up? And she said, and I wanted to text her, and I won't tell you what it was. And she said, because I'm doing good, I'm trying to accept her. And then it kind of dawned on her, do no harm. What does that mean here? And she realized, A, she had no idea what was going on for her sister-in-law. B, the harm was inflicted by her, by being at war with this idea that it should be different, that her sister-in-law should be a different person, that she should like her sister-in-law more. And there was so much harm, not only to the sister-in-law, but to her own heart by holding on to these as true. So this injection, really, of uncertainty comes with treating the vows as koans, which is what we do. And it forces you then to ask, good for whom? What does good mean? Is good ever absent? And I think it also forces a kind of humility into the situation that most of the time I don't know. I have to be there, I have to find out. And even then, I don't know for sure. Disturbing, but kind of a relief also. There's the literal way of taking the vows, but you see, if you start to engage them this way, things like not killing and not lying and not indulging in intoxicants, that it's like, anytime I'm trying to do away with some part of reality, I'm killing. Anytime I'm trying to manipulate, I'm lying. Anytime I'm chasing some kind of state, I'm looking for an intoxication of some kind. And this goes on and on and on and on, like front foot and back foot walking. This just goes on and on. Again, that absolute impossibility is kind of nice. Like all the bodhisattva vows are impossible. That's part of their magic. Absolutely impossible. But there becomes this kind of invitation where it's like what's being asked is we take refuge in reality. That's the awakening and the way and the companions. That I somehow have to be here. Last night, Jan Black, I'm looking at her, made a great comment, which was, she said, the more I practice, the more I just notice that when I'm saying something and it doesn't feel true, and I think that's true of all the vows, the more I'm here, like we did a class in the fall on the 10 vows, and it was so interesting because each week, each of the grave precepts has its own flavor. But at the end of the hour and a half, there would be the same feeling, which was when I'm not trying to do any of those things, when I don't need to raise myself up, when I don't need to disparage others, when I don't need to contrive reality for myself, when I don't need to, get something from someone, when I don't, there's a feeling to that state. It just kind of, when I'm really here, I don't actually need any of those things. They feel like extra. It's like our sensitivity increases and our integrity increases, and we're more in accord with reality as it is, and we can see when we're trying to mess with it, which is, most of the time. But you do get a glimpse. There's something in treating the vows this way that also makes them deeply, deeply personal. That they're not these abstract standards that we're somehow saying, life would be better if it were this way. It's that we each have to wrestle with how they appear in our particular lives, our particular ways of trying to do away with things or grab things or manipulate things, and our particular ways of getting free and feeling what it's really like to be here and not have to do that. And I think there's a kind of, that humility thing again, but I guess it's like, part of why I'm telling you this is to give you a sense maybe of the journey these folks have been on, having to gaze into these places in themselves. And also because I think one of the things you discover is how much we do want to do good and not hurt, and care about things and be part of things. And I don't know, kind of like we've experienced this week, how frightening it can be and how much can get in the way once we get afraid. So I guess I want to tell you a little story from my own, sort of feels like the territory of refuge is a little skin in the game. And so I want to tell you just a little snippet of a story in my life that was probably one of the more intense encounters I've had with the territory of what it means to take refuge in reality. And so many years ago, as I was trying to be a good bodhisattva, I worked for a while for this. I had decided that I really wanted to work for this nonprofit that would help train therapy animal teams. So if you wanted to go take your dog to cheer up kids with cancer or cheer up old people or, anything that this company, this nonprofit would help you. And I thought, this will be the fusion of my two great loves, like helping people and being close to animals. What could be better? Except for that the company itself was a train wreck and incredibly dysfunctional and full of angry people. And so that was dashed rather quickly. But after, hanging out there for a couple of years, this strange opportunity came to me by way of a friend, that this company was doing leadership work. They wanted to create this whole big leadership program for their executives about how really to learn to lead in the times we have, which are full of uncertainty and changing circumstances. And as one of the leaders eventually said, not the Napoleon style of leadership that's about knowing and forging forward. And that was sort of my background before I went to work for this nonprofit. And somehow I just thought, I need to find out what this is. And so I did. And it involved changing my life a lot, moving and taking a different job, because this one was only part-time, and moving a lot of things around. But it just sort of felt like there's something for me here. So I started supporting this coach who was partnering with the CEO of this company to create this leadership program. That was a really fun thing. We got to hire poets and peace builders and business people and design this whole kind of thing whereby, as much as business people can bear, they can taste a little bit of this. What is it to be open with each other? What is it to ask deeper questions of yourselves? What is it to face a world that you now know nothing about because it's changing so fast? But a huge part of my job involved listening to the coach complain about the CEO and what a terrible, difficult person she was to deal with, and how hard it was, and how it brought up her mother issues, and how, all this stuff. And I thought, man, the CEO, I don't know, she seems okay, but I don't know. And after about a year of this, the CEO wanted to start writing about some of the work. And the coach couldn't stand any more of her at this point. And she said, you have a writing background, why don't you go work with her? So I said, great, okay. The first week that we were supposed to talk, a very close friend of mine passed away. And I tell you that because part of this story is, and part of all of our stories, are that things are never just happening in the inner. Like everything is happening as a constellation of events. And it's all somehow relevant in the unfolding. Most of the time we think it's just something in here I can manage, but there's way more happening than that. And what that meant was that because the CEO found out about this, there was a tenderness that opened up in our relationship at the onset. Because, I don't know why actually, there just was. So there was this personal element that emerged immediately. So we started writing together, and mostly what that meant at the stage of the work was me just asking her a lot of questions. And I love to ask people questions. And I could feel in this person that something was unfolding, something deeper than what was going on in this work. The work was just a manifestation of it. I started just getting very curious about the person and very connected. I was also trying to date at the time, which was also kind of a train wreck. And I kept getting this voice inside my head that would say, well, why do you need to date? You can just be with her, the CEO. And I just thought, well, that's just nuts. That's just weird. I mean, there are 3 problems. 1, she's the big boss. 2, she's married. And 3, I don't think she's into girls. And in a way, I guess, like, I vow not to kill. I tried to kill this thought. It seemed dangerous and unwieldy, and I could not kill it. It just hung out. Then this opportunity came up where I heard she was going to be close to where I lived. And she didn't know I knew that. And I said, I really wish what we had is like a whiteboard and a bottle of wine and me just asking you lots of questions, because we were trying to flesh out this piece, which was a little lie because I knew she was going to be in the area. And she said, well, in fact, I'm going to be, in California next week. Would you like to come down to LA and have dinner? Oh, yeah, let me check my calendar. And again, this was a very strange thing, because at this point, I didn't totally still believe the thought, right? It was just this kind of thing. And I thought, well, that's just crazy and stupid, but fine. Like, you can hang out, thought, because you seem to not be going anywhere. And so I went down to LA and, just felt this being, this person. And we worked for a while, and it was an interesting energy, but I still didn't really know what to make of it. And we went to dinner that night before I had to take my flight. And again, I'm asking questions, and finally she stops me and she says, if we're going to do this, I need to also be able to ask you questions. I don't want it to just go one way. And I said, fair enough. And she said, yeah, and she said, I think that's what it means to be with me. I thought, be with me? Like, who says that? Work with me, fine. Partner with me, okay. But like, again, I tell you this because it's like things are seeping in. Reality is seeping in beyond the ideas. I guess in a way it became like, what the hell do I do with all this, right? I'm starting to become aware of having feelings for this person. This seems very dangerous and yet extremely alive. And I vow to do no harm. I vow to do good. I vow, not to misuse sex. I vow not to lie. And pretty soon it became clear to me that, like, I couldn't see a way forward, but I couldn't deny what was happening. And we were working on this article, but we were writing letters at the same time. And it's like the letters started to get longer and more personal. And it was almost like this line started to appear where I could be present of almost walking up to it and thinking, what is this? What's happening here? And occasionally I would just kind of touch it and expect that she would go like this. And she didn't, which made things worse. Because then I really didn't know what was happening or what it meant or what to do. We started really moving into the land of metaphor, which is incredibly safe. You could just tell that the conversation and the curiosity was getting more intimate. At a certain point, I couldn't bear that anymore. And there was no logical sort of, like, something should be done about this. it was an inner event that I couldn't bear that uncertainty anymore. And so I again had to like make a step. And it was probably one of the hardest things I think I've ever had to do, because it felt like so much was at stake. Not only what felt like all these feelings, but you know, my career and everything else. And it's like, I vow not to lie, I vow to do good. Like, what the hell is that in this circumstance? And so I confessed. And two things became immediately clear. One, she felt the same way and was terrified and confused about that. And two, she could not foresee a world in which she would blow apart her family and leave her 26-year marriage. So what do you do? Like, from the outside, you think, well, it should be clear, right? Like, I could just leave the work, ditch everything we've just like done for 2 years, and protect myself, or try not to make any of this any worse. We could pretend that this isn't happening and just be, you know, professional. Or she could forfeit her entire life for someone she barely knows in, you know, righteous morality. None of those things seemed like they were going to go very well. I think what we had to do was take refuge inside the situation. We had to keep entering it to find out. And that meant both the inner discovery of what is this, and is it real, and is it something that wants to happen, and also the outer events of that, which are like, how do you navigate this? What does it mean? What do you do? What feels in integrity? What's reasonable? And for a long time, we just continued our work and continued to try to get to know each other, and just had to hold it. There was nothing that could be done other than that. And I had to contend with the agony of not knowing if that ever was going to be different. And the tension of then starting to work with the HR head person, and then getting deeper and deeper into the company. And then all the complications that went along with that. And she had to contend with the agony of, do I end my marriage? And where am I? And what does this mean for my life? There were a few points where that would break, like those tensions would just break. And I'd say, I can't bear this anymore. I can't do it anymore. And she would say, well, should I, next weekend's my daughter's graduation, and then we go on a family holiday. And then we have a retreat for 400 executives. And like, when's a good time to enter this? And meanwhile, I guess it's worth saying again, the situation was beyond what I wanted for myself and what my ideas were about it. It was so far beyond, I actually didn't know what to do other than be in it. There was a way it almost was blowing apart that person, that naive person who wrote those vows and thought it was simple. And there was something both excruciating and incredibly freeing about that I can only know by being here. I can't step out of it. And really strange things started to happen along the way. The most significant of which was that, I met her daughter one weekend and stayed up late talking to her, and she came out to me for the first time she'd ever come out to anyone. which was this incredibly precious thing, but then later proved incredibly confusing for her because she had opened herself to me, and then suddenly she didn't know how to feel about me later, but I'll come back to that. But the second thing that happened was her husband kind of could feel that something was changing. And, right, that's what you'd think, but, and that's what I thought too. This guy is not gonna and yet that wasn't what happened, which was really interesting. It was almost like he had his own line that he was trying to figure out. Because in a way, what kept revealing itself was that they loved each other, but they led completely separate lives, and they were both incredibly lonely. And he could start to see that she was getting happier and more alive. And that was confusing for him, because I think he could see that, and he loved her enough to see that. But I think he also was contending with what that might mean. And he would make little comments to her. He's French, and there's a word in French, la copine, which is girlfriend, but also girlfriend, and it can be taken either way. And he would say to her, "Oh, you're going with your copine." And she would say, yeah, my friend. He would say, "Yeah, your friend." And, but what was very interesting was he didn't try to stop it. Didn't do anything. And one day, he told the driver what he said, would he send me up to see him. I'm thinking, oh, where is this going? And we sat in the kitchen, and he came up to me, and I could just feel him almost like X-ray vision, like checking me out. And all I can explain is almost some kind of silent thing passed between us of him saying, "Are you a good person? Do you really love this person? Do you want to hurt my family?" And me saying, "No, I don't want to hurt your family, and yes, somehow I do love this person, and somehow we're all in this situation together, and nobody knows what to do." And finally, when no one could take it anymore, and she told him, he knew. And all that had happened in the dark, all that time, all that waiting, all that not knowing was sort of allowing things to find their place. And in a way, had we tried to impose something on it, to make it something, it would have been incredibly violent and hurtful. But there was no knowing that when we were in the middle of it. We just had to kind of and we had to keep doing that, because then, it was still painful. There was still pain. There wasn't a lot of suffering added on, but there was still pain, and there was pain for the kids. And there was pain in the moving of things apart, and the contending with loss. And there was also, I guess for a long time, there was nothing to fix that either. Like with the kids who I had this kind of, they were incredibly kind to me. The only thing I could do is drive them back to school. Because it was a long drive, and they didn't want to take the train, and it was so fucking awkward. Because they didn't know how to talk to me, and I didn't know, you can't force that kind of thing. But I could drive them back to school. And eventually, like, we'd talk a little bit. And eventually, little things would start to move that would allow connection, that would allow things to start to reform. And yeah, well, now we've been married, for almost 5 years. And it's a big moment in my life. And it's a big moment in, I guess, my understanding of this territory. It asks something very deep of us to touch into, to know things when we can't know things, and find ways of caring when it doesn't make sense, and contend with the impossibility of things sometimes and trust them. And I think that is taking refuge in reality. Because I was saying last night, reality is so generous. All these things were given. And even though the situation itself felt impossible, each step just kept appearing if we were willing to bear it. And I guess I also tell it to you because each of these people, each of these 8 refugees, each of you have your own versions of those impossibilities. And I think one of the kindnesses we have as being a Sangha is that we help hold those for each other somehow. And we give space for that uncertainty to appear. When someone says, well, I know I need to, or I know it's bad that or I know I shouldn't have. And you think, well, I don't know. The refrain in the vows is the way things are is mysterious and hard to see. We get to take refuge in reality, but reality is mysterious and hard to see, so it requires this constant engagement with it, this constant asking. And tonight you'll get to hear 8 versions of what that means to people. Maybe I want to stop there for a little bit and see if you guys have anything to say. Chris.
First is a question. The refrain, things are mysterious and hard to see. That's not in some of the precepts, right?
Just the last 10.
Yeah. So anyway, I just had that's interesting that some of them don't have that introduction. And then the other thing, not the other thing, but as I was listening, it is a question like, it wouldn't have mattered if it all would have gone up in flames.
That's right. Still might.
But currently not.
Yeah, it still might. We have to move 3 times in the next 6 months, so but yes, I think that's an incredibly important point, and that's the aliveness of the territory. Is it and even if had it gone up in flames, it was still true as it was unfolding, right? Yes, we're not cornering a good outcome.
Right. It's not, and they all lived happily ever after.
That's right.
Except they do, even if it goes up in flames.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that's, one of the interesting things about refuge in our world at the moment. When we first started traveling again, there was this feeling of there's no escape from what's happening. Like, I don't know, it used to sort of feel that you could be in one place and it might be hard there, but you could go somewhere and it would be different there. It doesn't feel like that right now. Like, there's no place, even here, Santa Sabina. Like, things are tight for them. It's different for them than when we were here before. There's a generosity in that, but it's hard. They're worried about how many flowers they have, and they're trying to keep things together, and you feel that. And it's like we have to be in that together, taking refuge in that together. You guys don't have any water here, and we have more ticks than we can possibly contend with. And I guess it's that somehow whatever is going to arise has to come from being in what we're in, not from any ideas about it. What else? Eleanor.
I could really feel, I could feel your heart as you were speaking. And I appreciate that. It's that kind of vow, to stay with that.
Yeah, it's like that, abiding nowhere, the heart mind comes forth. Like, even in there, I said to someone yesterday, even if you only say 4 words, if they're true, like that's the vow for you. It's not explaining or contending with anything. So yeah. Eleanor.
About not being safe, which isn't what I want to say primarily, but if people didn't notice that eucalyptus that came down wasn't cut down, it fell down, and it could have easily landed on the roof. And the fire that Sister Margaret talked about is right there. Right there. So we walk on the road, it's right there. If there was a wind, there's no way it wouldn't have just. So yeah, there is no place that's safe. But somehow your talk in this week, one of the things that is really sitting with me is front foot, back foot walking. I don't know that anybody could put 5 words together that says so much. There's no judgment and there's no role, because one moment the front foot becomes a back foot, the back foot becomes a front foot. And the walking implies that movement. And it feels like even your stories, like everything, it is interwoven and not interwoven. It's just the same, and it plays. And I was just thinking of all the sayings we have about steps, take a step forward, step up, step back, step down. And when I run, my feet have to communicate with each other. Because if one foot finds a rock, the other foot has to know what to do, or else face plant.
You remind me of one of the old ancient characters for companion is the 2 wings of the pengbird, which is in the Zhuangzi. But it's like those 2 wings, same body, companioning each other and don't realize they're the same. So.
Thanks. I'm always thrilled by your courage, and it's hard to stay with the opposites when they're trying to, tear apart and make somebody wrong and right, things like that. And so, good job. And so it's very touching for me. And it's a thing, it's hard to walk through life in dark like that, but we don't really have a choice. And I'm very impressed with the elegance with which you've done that. I tend to just like wander into things more like Chris said, everything blows up and I think, well.
It's one way to create change.
And our whole community's got that situation because we're trying to discover how can you be faithful to the old Zen and still have a Zen that works here. It means something true. We can talk about real things. And so I'm very touched by your ability to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think even this retreat was that, right? Should we have this thing? Is it, is it crazy? Will people come? Is it,
Yeah, will we be a super spreader?
Will we?
No, they're real risks.
Yeah,
They're real risks, and just to sort of feel it and tell the truth, and feel it and tell the truth, it's kind of marvelous. And also to keep things dark when they need to be kept dark is really important, because the transformations happen in the dark.
Right.
The dark way is not sharp, of course. Yeah, awesome, thank you. How to tell the truth.
You did it marvelously. It was touching. We all relate to those, maybe we all don't, but I think to those very difficult times in our life.
You have one?
Yeah.
Will you tell it to us?
And it's very hard when you're in those things to not try to control and manipulate and just let it flow. It's very hard. You have to be aware of the fact that you are controlling and manipulating to begin with. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. David, wait. He got it up before I got my bow down.
I was appreciating a kind of reformulation of the vows about taking refuge and awakening and the way and community. My companion says, I'm saying I'm going to flee from but return to awakening. I'm going to flee from but return to the community. I'm going to flee from but return to the way, and how that's what the practice is bringing myself, returning to these things. And that's why I take refuge in, the returning.
Yes, and you've written your vows many times. I like that about David. He says, what is it now? What is it now to return?
Raise my finger and say something.
Laura?
Well, I was just thinking about the this similarity, difference between the tension that you were holding, that I think John mentioned, that versus suffering. I mean, I never got suffering out of that, and I think of, when you were talking. that the tension was uncomfortable and at one point unbearable, and so you took another step. But I never thought of it as suffering, although, you know, as you were telling the story, and I thought, well, why isn't that suffering? You know, it sounds really hard, but it didn't have that flavor to it.
I think so much of suffering is it shouldn't be this way. And you're right, there's such a difference between this is hard and it shouldn't be happening, which is, I feel like, the tension we're in so much at the moment, I mean, in life, but in our world. The suffering comes when you think it shouldn't, you know, then you start coming up with all your reasons why it shouldn't be this way and who should fix it and what should be, you know, and one of the gifts of the situation was that it was so unclear what should happen, because it was, and there were a few times when suffering would creep in to say, you know, it was almost like I would say to her, you should fix this, you know, you like, and for her she would just start to weep and just say, what shall I do, you know, and it would then reveal, no, this is all that can be done right now, and then there's a kind of relaxing, but and timing is such a weird thing. And, you know, my own inkling is to want to, like, move into the next step. And there's something quite, I don't know. It was strangely good for me to not be able to do that, to not be able to solve it or to have to bear it and just see what might happen, because it actually gave me more trust, even though it seemed like a friend of mine, I remember a very good friend of mine saying to me, I don't see how you're not going to be crushed. I said, me neither, but I can't, you know, I don't know what else to do. Yeah.
Maybe it's okay to be crushed too.
All right, friends. Thank you very much.
Please restore the hall.